Hey everyone, I'm Adam Nigro, commercial advertising photographer based in frigid Montreal, Canada. And today I'm going to bring you along on my journey of how I created this photograph. So I was contacted by a digital agency in Amsterdam who found my work on the internet and thought I would be a great fit for one of their upcoming projects. Their client was a large tobacco manufacturer, and they're launching a new product called Thor, which is a tobacco-free nicotine pouch, similar to snus, but without the tobacco. So anyway, they needed some key visuals for their digital and print marketing needs. Hey, so I just got the product mailed to me from freaking Belgium, I think. Luxembourg. Where is that? Belgium. And it's sitting on my front doorstep, so I'm gonna go take a look and make sure that we got the right thing. I'm very surprised it made it over the border considering what it is. But, if it's there, that's great. We can get started right away. When shooting photos for advertising agencies, it all starts with a brief. What is a brief? It can be just a couple sentences spoken on the phone, or it can be a complex multi-page document. But at the end of the day, it's essentially your creative compass for executing the photographic materials for the project. In this particular case, I was blessed to have a brief that was full of sketches, mood boards, as well as the very descriptive terms, energy, power, emotion, magic. Yeah, so sometimes it's a little bit tricky to understand what the client means by that. Like, how do you take their vision and translate it into an effective piece of visual communication that not only looks great, but also resonates with their target audience? That's what it's all about. It's creative problem solving. All right, so what are we shooting? This is the product. So when you first receive the product, it's a really good idea to study it and take notice of all the different materials, the shape of it, how the different materials react to different qualities of light and different angles of light. You can notice here that there's a bunch of different things going on, including a car horn outside. You got this white plastic rim, and on top you have this blue semi-gloss surface with a little bit of grit to it. You have this 3D embossed logo, and then this foil at the bottom, which also circles the entire surface. You better be sure that you don't fail to capture every single one of these design elements, because the client has spent a ton of money and time putting this together. So if you fail to capture, let's say the 3D embossed print, you might have to reshoot entirely. Glossy surfaces are a bit tricky because the light needs to be pointing in a very specific angle for it to really shine. And that has something to do with what's called the principle of the angle of incidence of reflection, I believe. Basically what that means is turn on your live view in Capture One or Lightroom and just move your light around until you see a reflection that is as bright as the light of 1,000 suns.
Aziz, light!
Another thing that the client was very particular about that they wanted represented was what they called superior metallic effects. You know, you've seen it on high-end beauty cosmetic advertising, basically those like strips of light that indicate that it is a high quality metal. The problem in this case is that we are dealing with plastics and foil and generally a cheaper packaging than those high-end cosmetic products. So it's a challenge, but that's your job as the photographer, is to take the product and present it in the best possible light. So if we open it up, this is the actual product. It is a white, fluffy pillow filled with delicious nicotine. And I guess the way it works is you take this and you shove it up between your gums, and the nicotine gets absorbed through the mucous membrane. And you know, apparently it's not that harmful compared to snus, which are tobacco filled. So when I shoot a product like this, I use one light and make a composite of several images, each one highlighting a specific part in a certain way. This also gives me the utmost flexibility in post-production, because if the client sees your shot and says, you know, I think it needs a stronger highlight on the rim, you can go back into your bank of images and literally just paint it in Photoshop. Now that I've taken all the necessary shots of the product, it's time to load this into Photoshop, where the real work begins. So let's get going. The first thing I do is I line up all my images using guides. When doing a composite like this, there's a real tendency to get some minor camera shifts between each take. There is a way to do this in Photoshop, but I like to be extra precise, so I do it the slow way. The second step is to make selections for all the important parts of your product. Obviously, there's this big blue, the blue foil rim around it, the white plastic part, etc. And you better save these selections because they will come in handy throughout the retouching process. Next thing, I paint in the text using a much brighter and flattering image from our image bank, and repeat that for the entire surface of the tin. So this Thor, as well as this Viking guy, is actually embossed, so it's 3D. So I had to make sure that I had images of both the reflective, specular highlights, as well as the rounded shadows that really make this guy seem like he's got some dimension. The side rim of the lid was really where we were gonna make those superior metallic effects really shine through. So I spent a good deal of effort trying to make this look as dramatically metal as possible, really accentuating the brights and the darks and having these sharp color bars, which is indicative of a higher end reflective material. So around this point, I get so distraught about looking at how beat up and dusty this tin is, which is my fault. You always handle your product with gloves and clean it beforehand. Anyway, I'm compelled to start cleaning up the edges. So I'm using the clone tool to fill in the edges to make a nice perfect curve thanks to that selection I made earlier. And I can just paint right to the edge of the mask and the mask does the rest. So I repeat the whole process for the bottom tin now. I spent way too much time making this look perfect when it was just going to be blurred out later anyway. That was a client request from one of the revisions. So now that that's done, we can start actually working on building out our composition. So I export these as separate items into a new Photoshop document, and that's to free up some RAM because I'm going to need some major juice later on. I load in all the pouches that I shot individually and start playing around with them to see where they fit best. I find this to be one of the most challenging parts of the whole process because you're playing with depth of field and some things are closer to the camera, some things are further away, and you gotta blur it just right and make it just big enough or your eye will tell that something is not right. I then start to play around with some effects to convey motion, explosive power, lightning. So finally, after all that post-production, we get this image, which I'm pretty happy with for a V1. And I send it off to the agency who then sends it off to the client. So the days that follow are always a little bit filled with anxiety because, you know, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this, there's always that small chance that the client is gonna absolutely hate what you've done. And all that time, all that work, all that freaking genius that went into producing your images are shut down just like that, and you gotta start over again. So luckily that didn't happen in this case. They were pretty happy with what I had done so far. They just had a few minor revisions. But thankfully these guys were actually really smart. They understand packaging and the art of packaging, and they have a keen eye for this kind of thing. So their suggestions were actually really good and made the image even better. So it's always nice to have a client like that who is a collaborator. So after we do all the revisions we're asked, we arrive at this image here. And that's the one we settled on, and this went to be printed on their displays and in their printed ads and for all the world to see and pick up a pack of nicotine pouches and become like Thor. Yeah. Well, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed coming along on this journey with me, and I hope you learned something. And if you want to see more videos like this, including videos on how I get clients, give this video a like and a thumbs up, which are the same thing, and a subscribe. Because I'm going to be using those metrics to gauge the interest of this and see if I want to do more. So until then, happy frickin' photography.